because they talked about this issue in a way that wasn't inclusive enough, their entire scientific reputation now is being questioned. The scientific community is very, this is a hot button issue because the field of science that I'm in is more, it's not a social science. So the social sciences are what kind of initially started this movement, like way back when. It was psychologists and, John Money, Alfred Kinsey, these people who were studying sexuality. That was their research, was actually on those things. And so people in my world, I would say, aren't really aware of that. I wasn't aware of that because I didn't take gender studies or anything like that. I had no idea about the history of any of those, awful studies that were performed on like little kids and
right. Yeah.
Just absolutely awful work. And if anyone is curious, like just Google John Money or Alfred Kinsey and it will come up some of the research that they did. Yeah. So there's that area of research. And, that's back in the 50s. That was a long time ago. But now we're seeing a request for research that is representative of transgender individuals. Now, the problem with that is, well, there are a lot of problems, but one main problem is that there isn't a lot of research on it because it's such a small percentage of the population. And for all of time until very recently, there wasn't this surge of transgender women, so men who identify as women, playing in women's sports or competing or having, a lot of physical studies done on them to study their exercise habit. Like it's just something that doesn't exist right now. There's not a strong body of evidence. And what happens when there's not a strong body of evidence is people kind of just take whatever they want to use as evidence until we get more science to say something should or shouldn't happen. And that's why it's become such a hyper emotional argument rather than a rational and logical one, because there is not a huge body of literature to point to say, look, these studies show that transgender women are the same as women. And there's no difference in their hormones. There's no difference in their performance outcomes. We don't have that right now. And I worry actually that even if we do have that because of the way scientific articles are being kind of flagged down on this issue, that we may not have sound science. So there have been scientists who have tried to publish some of these pieces, not even necessarily physiology pieces, but just talking about detransitioners. So people who have transitioned to the opposite gender and transitioned back. Any issues around that weren't really favorable to the narrative that's being played out. They were, dragged through the mud and canceled, so to speak. And people with very good reputations, they have, several years of service, never had any sort of dishonest science or anything like that. But because they talked about this issue in a way that wasn't inclusive enough, their entire scientific reputation now is being questioned. And that's pretty much what happens to people who decide to speak out on this and their findings, aren't in line with the narrative that's at play.
Why do you think Christians don't? I think Christians are aware that type of stuff happens. They might not be aware of the ins and outs behind it, but Christians are definitely aware that there are other Christians who will have a thought and that thought gets shut down. Let's use that general phrase. It either gets shut down by them losing their job or losing an account or, being threatened, whatever, but it gets shut down. How come Christians don't see that as kind of trying to perpetuate these narratives by force? Like if transgenderism, for example, is true, why do you have to use force of removing people from positions and things? Why doesn't it just speak for itself? Why do you think Christians don't? I guess, how do we get to this place? We're arguing about women, y'all. How did we get here?
I think it was slow, and there were enough people who didn't speak up or didn't think that it was going to end up to where it is. And the people who did say that, everyone was like, that's crazy. That's never going to happen. Um, in particular with same sex marriage and the LGBT community,
Yeah.
no one, I mean, there was always the T, but at the time, I feel like it was out of people's immediate reality. Like they maybe didn't know anyone who
Right.
was transgender. The gender pronoun thing wasn't really in the forefront of their life. So they could kind of just ignorance is bliss kind
Yeah,
of thing.
is that synonymous with transsexual, transgender?
I believe they're used synonymously now, but there's a lot of like technical terminology that people choose to use and choose not to use. I know
True.
that
I have no idea.
his like people who who were transgender maybe 20 years ago,
Mhm.
they used the term transsexual because they knew that they could change they would say that they could change their sex but not their gender.